Okay, hello everyone. I really apologize. I've started 2 minutes way past time. I know that we just had just a little technical in quotes difficulty, but we're great. We already have our speakers here already, and I just want to first of all say thank you very much everyone for being here. Um, I want to see some comments on the comment box. I know that there are some personal I see some chats going on in the comment section, so you're very, very much welcome. Thank you very much for being a part of this. I know that there's so much going on, both in the country and out. There's a lot of news, but I'm very, very sure that you're gonna have a very interesting time. So, for those persons who have signified that they're already part of this stream, I would like you to just, put a comment in the comment section and just let us know that you are here. We have a very, very interesting topic that we are going to be talking about today. And of course, we already know what exactly happens when we talk about, startups. So this is the startup compliance series where we basically talk about everything startups. So from funding, fundraising to understanding the environment to corporate governance to anything technical really, right? And this is such an interesting season because the past sessions or the past events that have gone on, the last series we practically talked about how startups can begin to implement very, very good corporate governance practices even in their offices, in their organizations. We've talked about startup trends for 2023 and what are some of the key things that we are to look out for. Some very, very interesting things. So if you're on LinkedIn, make sure you're sharing the link to someone else. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you're sharing the link to someone else. So I see Marvelous. Thank you, Marvelous, for being here. We see your comments and we really, really appreciate them. We also see, yes, I see. Wow, awesome. Thank you. So please put it on the comment section. Why are you here? Where are you chatting in, or where are you logging in from? I would definitely love to see that, right? So thank you very much for being here, and we're very excited that you've actually taken this time out to be a part of this. So the next thing I'll be talking about is basically what we do here at the Start of Compliance series. And basically this is a series where we actually get to talk about everything startups and how startups can literally navigate a technical environment that is filled with so much regulation. So I know a couple of us are on the polls. Saturday, maybe there's no one happening today, but there are definitely events going on that are of national importance. So we do not discountenance that. But in the meantime, we are very happy that this session is recorded. So you are definitely going to be able to always come back and watch this. And we have such an amazing person with us today. I was really, really excited when I reached out to him and said, "Oh, I would love to talk about this because it's a very important and critical aspect for a lot of businesses and a lot of startups." So I see some people in the studio. So I'm so sorry I may not be able to add you because you shouldn't really be here. So it'd be great to go back to the main of course, the main place. All right. So thank you very much as you go. All right. So thank you very much. All right. So the topic for today is a very interesting one, and it's a startup's legal and compliance guide to international expansion. Now, wherever we go, we are always faced with the issues of startups always wanting to know exactly how they can become, in quotes, global companies in some respect. And there's something I would always say, being global is not about just saying I'm a global startup or I'm a global company. There's so many things you need to understand about the legal and the compliance environment, from understanding the kinds of structures you have. And we are basically going to be talking about that a lot today, right? We're going to be talking about that a lot today. And so I definitely would be very excited to introduce my guest because he's somebody that has a lot of experience basically dealing with a lot of companies. He's a technology lawyer, right? And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I have a bias for bringing on lawyers," but what can I do? What can I say? Because basically that's why we are here. We exist to basically help you, right? So first of all, I just want to say once again, thank you for being a part of this session, and I'm definitely looking forward to having you, engage, and of course, getting ready to, start this series, right? So while we are doing this, it's very important also to know some of the rules. At the end of the day, you can always ask your questions. If you have any questions or you have anything that you would love to ask, you can always put your questions down, and I'm definitely sure that our speaker is going to be here to answer your questions. All right. Good. I see Emmanuel Demeoru saying, Rosemond, it's good to see you again. It's such a pleasure, Emmanuel. Thank you. So I'm going to be reading the profile of our speaker. And yes, our speaker is not based in Nigeria. He actually currently runs a technology-based law firm in Brooklyn, United States. And his name is Ezra Salami. And I'll be reading his profile. It's quite long, but I'm going to do my best to round it. So Ezra specializes in business law related matters, spanning a business's entire life cycle, namely corporate formation and governance, investment agreements, and contractual agreements. On top of his business law expertise, clients gain first-hand exposure to Ezra's years worth of small to mid-sized business commercial litigation experience, adding an invaluable perspective on the real-world implications of poorly written contracts and critically how to avoid them. Before founding the firm, Ezra practiced law on both the plaintiff and defense sides at several high-stake firms in New York City, and throughout his career, he's also taking steps to expand his background by studying business internationally and practicing law abroad. Ezra graduated from Fordham University of Law, after completing his undergraduate degree in business administration at Morehouse College, where he took some of his courses and studies abroad in the international financial capital of Dubai, United Arab Emirates. He's licensed to practice in New York federal and state courts, and during his free time, you will find Ezra taking golf quite seriously, offering his unsolicited opinions on movies and television shows, and supporting local mom and pop restaurants. And that's not just because he can't cook to save his life, right? That being said, I want you to use this opportunity to help me welcome Ezra Salami to the room. Ezra is with us, and I'm looking forward to having him join us. And just thank you, Ezra, for being here. I hope you can hear me, right? We had such a deal starting this session, but please, you can unmute yourself and just let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Can you guys hear me?
Awesome.
Uh,
Definitely, we can. I am really excited, Ezra, being here. First of all, the first thing that excites me about you being here is the fact that you're actually from Nigeria, if I'm correct, right? Your surname is already a giveaway. So, yeah, you have so much experience already. And, when I was looking through your website, your firm, and what you do, I, I was really happy because you're doing a lot of great work in the startup and technologically driven business space, and it's very exciting to see. I know that you have a lot of experience usually working with these organizations, and I know that it can be quite the drill. And so I'm really excited about the kinds of questions that we are going to be talking about today, because a lot of startups have concerns with what does it take to expand, because we are actually critically looking at issues as regards international expansion, legal compliance. So my first question is not really a question. It's more or less, can you walk us through some of the experiences and how it was for you, first of all, moving to the United States, starting your firm, and what your experience practically has been in the startup space as you made that transition? It would be so great to hear about that.
Right, right. No, thank you so much, Rose, for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with your audience. I'm wearing my Nigerian colors, color tie at least today. I don't know if anyone noticed that. I wish that I was on the ground there in my country, especially on such a special day like today, with so much political. Um, States currently going on. But in any event, to answer your question, I guess I didn't really have a lot to do, or excuse me, I don't really remember much about coming from Nigeria to the United States because I was still basically in the crib. I came over, my family came over that early on in the process. So, I've effectively grew up in America, and obviously, would go home periodically to Nigeria to visit, family and friends, both in Lagos and Ibadan. But for the most part, all of my upbringing and schooling was here in the United States. So it was a great experience. I had a great childhood. I eventually, graduated from. I guess you guys would call it a secondary school, high school. Went on to college and entered into law school. And while I was in law school, you start to find out what type of law that you like to practice. And I found that through, the various internships or temporary legal positions that I took while I was in school. And those were very informative for me because not only did it teach me what I liked, but more importantly, it taught me what I didn't like. So that was just a really, really good experience for me. And then, after graduating from law school, I started to work with different founders, and I found it to be more rewarding working with founders. I call it from the diaspora. So, both from Nigeria, West Africa, Ghana, South Africa, but then also, a lot of talented founders from, Jamaica, Haiti, the Caribbean, also, Latin America, the Black populations from Latin America. It was just a really exciting time and environment. And I just said, you know what, I think I want to make a full-time career out of this. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. Hope I didn't ramble too much.
Yeah. No, you didn't. You didn't. All right, that's great. Thank you for that. And it's great to see, there was something you said, and I think every person who is starting a journey needs to get this information, and that's that when you're exposed to, in quote, law school, it's good to decide very early what you don't want,
Right.
right? It's just good to know what you don't want, and I think that clarity is super important, especially if you are going to be doing work for such a long time as what the legal profession requires. You need to love what you do, right? So yeah, thanks for that. So let's not talk too much. All right, I'm just going to go straight to it. So the topic before us is legal compliance for international expansion. Now, what are some of the so now we this audio, or this session is primarily dedicated to startups who really maybe are based in one African country. Let's use Nigeria, obviously, because we're here. I'm here at the moment, and you're thinking of scaling. And by scaling simply means you're trying to establish a juristic person. That simply means getting your company incorporated, in a foreign jurisdiction and all that. What are some of the legal considerations that you need to start thinking about now, and you need to start putting in place at the moment? So I would love you to speak to that and let us know, what are some of the things that we should look at, especially if you're trying to scale internationally. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a fair question and a good question. So thank you so much, Rose. Yeah, so um, if you're certainly looking to do any type of business in America as a startup, ground zero, day one, your objective is to get incorporated in America, but more particularly in Delaware. And Delaware is a state, in America. You know, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Delaware is a state in America where, investors at this point, just because it's been decades and decades of it, they require that you be incorporated in Delaware as a it's called a C corp, which is a type of legal entity that I'm sure many of your listeners have already heard of, but if they haven't, um, uh, please indulge me. So a C corp is effectively a type of legal structure. It's a corporation that you have to file with the state to let the state know, or let the government know, that I am now incorporating as a corporation. And it's important that if you're looking to scale, particularly in America, that you do that in Delaware as a C corp, because again, if you choose another state or another type of legal entity, for instance, there's another type of legal entity called a LLC, which perhaps some of your listeners have heard of as well. Um, it becomes extremely difficult, and I would even go as far as to say impossible, for you to get any type of traction with American-based investors, and actually, for that matter, EU or any other international type of investors, because again, it's to the point now in 2023, and it's been this way for a long time, that if you want investors are the position that if you want my money, if you want my infusion of capital, I need to know that you are duly authorized, incorporated Delaware C corp. So that's 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 rule number one. It cannot be rated. Um, I'm sorry. What was your follow up question to that? I apologize. It was a long winded answer.
Okay, so it's what are some of the legal considerations to actually scale like internationally? So you've mentioned registration as a C corp as a key part of that. So basically, like a list of what are the steps, to
Right.
have
Okay.
that
Okay.
presence, especially if you are in a domestic.
Right. Yeah. So that's rule number one, to be incorporated as a Delaware C corp. Step number two is to uh, find a U.S. based attorney that can help you with it's called corporate formation. Basically, um, the building blocks of your would be legal entity. So it's kind of confusing, but really when you think about it, it's not. So it's one thing to file your incorporation papers with the government, with Delaware, that says that okay, I want to be a corporation, but it's another thing altogether to have the actual legal documents, the internal legal documents that are necessary and extremely important to have the proper infrastructure within your company. These legal documents include a stock plan. These legal documents include corporate bylaws, which are basically the rules of any organization. The documents can also include confidentiality agreements that each corporate board member and/or employee has to enter into if they're going to be part of the company. These documents are legal documents. They're extremely important documents, and they need to be prepared by a competent legal counsel. And that's not the role of the state. The government is not going to be able to do that for you. You need to be able to, again, find and source a U.S. based attorney that can help you out with those critical, important documents, in order for you to have the correct foundation to begin to scale. Because again, it goes back to what investors want and demand. If an investor says that if an investor sees that, okay, yes, you're incorporated as a Delaware C corp, okay, that's good. That's the first step. But then if they start to do more of due diligence and a deep dive into your records, and they see that you don't have the proper documentation that is, associated with any corporate entity, that just gives them more reason to say, okay, I don't think that this is a stable enough company for me to place my money. Um, uh, and then, once you have these two critical steps, then you can start to, solicit and have, important introductory, preliminary conversations with investors, and then feel confident that, once the discussions start to progress, there won't be anything stopping uh, the actual infusion of cash, because your internal records aren't correct. So that's why, you know, um, o- oftentimes I talk to startup founders and business owners, and they think that, and I understand it, and it's important that they focus on on their product, but also a part of your product is your corporation and how you're running your corporation. So if your corporation, it does not have those, I call it corporate infrastructure, legal infrastructure. If it does not have those critical legal documents in place, yes, you might have a great product, and you may have a ton of end users and people subscribing across the globe. But that doesn't, it's impressive, but that won't necessarily seal the deal when it comes to investors who have millions and millions and millions of dollars at stake.
I love, I thank you so much. I actually love the distinction that you made between, of course, LLCs and C corps, and the fact that having presence is not enough. You need to actually liaise with representatives and attorneys over there who can
Mhm.
help you draft the required documents and all. Because the truth is that it gets very hazy. You have a lot of people who think, okay, so for example, there's something very critical you mentioned, and that it will be very hard for maybe foreign based investors to trust your business or trust your capacity to deliver based on the amount they're giving if you do not have some sort of established presence over there. And I
Right.
think that's the very first consideration, because when you start considering the fact that you are trying to encode maybe different, like I always mention, different startups are in different stages. So, maybe a startup that's in ideation may not necessarily think it important. But I think foundationally, if you're at your ideation stage and you're still trying to think of something, you may say, oh, let me at least trademark or just register this idea or just have this there, as a foundation. And then you
Right.
can start building on that foundation, right? If the goal of every startup basically is to scale. So,
Right.
the sooner you start, the better. But I would love so you mentioned about the incorporation, and a lot of people confuse, there's a joke I always say. I say that when you have a lot of startups that do not want to pay or do not want to get proper technical or legal advice, they start making unnecessary errors and mistakes. I have
Right.
come across business owners who do not even understand the distinction between being registered as an LLC, um,
Right.
a C or a C corp, and you've given a distinction. But I would love you to actually speak to it, because I know over here in Nigeria, we have different forms of company registration. So I'll give a typical example: a sole proprietorship that does not have shareholders or a board of directors or whatever. It's called a sole proprietorship or a business name. So in
Right.
Nigeria, it's called business name, right?
Hmm.
If it's a limited liability, so if it has shareholders and the rest, it's called a limited liability company.
Okay.
That's like a C corp in the US, right? I don't know if I'm right, so maybe you'll tell me about that. But it has a board, has shareholders, and all that. and then you have limited liability partnerships. So it's
No.
not like it doesn't have shares, but you have partnerships. So can you help us with some distinctions, how it applies there and what it's called, and what's the best form of cooperation? You've spoken to it, but I want you to just be a little bit more specific so that startups like that are listening would know, okay, I shouldn't do an LLC, I should do a C corp, or I should do this other form of incorporation. Yeah.
Right, right. No, no, it's a fair question, and you're absolutely right. You say that you get this question a lot. Um, uh, in Lagos, I get it a lot here in New York as well. Because you're right. If you're not looking at it every day and studying it like we do as attorneys, then you don't really see much of a difference. But again, from an investor standpoint, there's a ton of difference. So I'll start off with saying there's only two types of legal entities. Um, there's a C corp, which is what we talked about before, but then there's also LLCs, a limited liability corporation. And effectively, the difference between a C corp and an LLC is that a C corp, just by its and I don't want to scare anybody away by saying this, but just by its complexity, because of its complexity, it's able to respond to and incorporate a lot more different types of investors, and also is able to issue a lot more different types of stocks. Whereas a LLC, or a limited liability corporation, there's not a lot of legal paperwork involved in those type of entities. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? So if I'm opening up, just to use a Nigerian example, if I'm opening up a puff shop, I don't need to be a Delaware C corp. It's okay for me to be an LLC, and with very little legal paperwork on the inside, because what I'm trying to do doesn't require a ton of complexity. But if I'm trying to be a startup, a tech startup, that attracts a lot of different type of investors. That requires a lot of different types of stocks. So we're talking about common stock, preferred stock, Series A, Series B, Series C, just a lot of different types of stocks being issued. So, because of that, the best way to account for that is to be a C corp. That would basically be like my biggest distinction for between a C corp and an LLC, is that as a C corp, because you're trying to do something more complex in the marketplace, again, a cutting edge, brand new technology company, the corporation reflects that complexity. Whereas if you're trying to do something a little bit more, mom and pop or mainstream, more puff restaurant, then a LLC will suffice. I don't want to say that one is better than the other; they're just different. But I will say that one is required, and that one is one is required by investors, and that is a C corp, a Delaware registered incorporated C corp.
I'm actually monitoring the comments, so that's why you see me moving a lot. For
No.
those of you that are on the studio back end, please, you will need to go to the YouTube and LinkedIn live so that you can actually watch from there. All right. Okay. So thank you for that distinction. So basically, to avoid the technicality, you basically have to, work with being a C corp rather than, an LLC. So I know that there may be different advantages, but would you recommend? So you basically recommend starting small. So starting basically with the C corp, if I'm correct, right?
Right, right. So, thank you. That's a good point, Rose. If I can touch on that just a little bit more. So,
Mm,
you know, I don't want people to have the mistaken impression that, oh, I incorporated as an LLC, so therefore I will never be able to attract international or American-based investors. No, that's not true. I'm just saying that before any real type of capital is infused in your company, they will require that you change the legal entity type of your company from an LLC to a C corp. You know, and what that does is it just makes it more costly for you. So if you would have just incorporated as a C corp beforehand, as opposed to waiting, you wouldn't have this issue. But now, if you uh, incorporate as an LLC, you're operating as an LLC for a couple of years. You have contracts with different vendors as an listed as an LLC, and then this big time investor comes in and says, I want to invest, $2.2 million in you. But first, before I do that, I want you to reconfigure as a C corp. You can do that. It's just that makes it that's a lot of legal work that lawyers now have to undo in order to get you ready for that infusion of investment capital. So if you can avoid that, I would think that people would want to. So that's why I say again, it's just best to do it right the first time.
yeah, I agree with you. So that's very, I think that's very, very important. And I think everyone listening basically would appreciate the unique distinction and the fact that you really, really want to be able to make sense early, right? You do not want to start with having so much unnecessary paperwork to do, especially when you are not at the point where you think you really, really need that. I would compare what you've explained to if you're trying to maybe incorporate or establish yourself as maybe a public limited liability company or a public unlimited company. Nigeria would basically have so many forms of incorporation, but of course we understand that the system that is applicable there is different, right? So please, I want you to talk to me about taxation and accounting requirements and intellectual property. What are some key things to consider when you are going into an international space and you really want to get that aspect of your business right to be able to attract the right kind of investor? So I'd love you to speak to that. Can you hear me? Sorry, you're muted. Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, I can't hear you again. Okay, I think your second device went out. Can you hear me? I think your second device is out, so I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself? Is it possible? Okay, are you able to speak now?
Uh, but
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
you can hear me now?
yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. I apologize about that. But I think you can hear me now. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay, so I said speak to tax and accounting requirements and intellectual property for these startups that are considering coming over and establishing themselves over there. What are some of the things that they have to pay attention to as far as tax, accounting, and IP protection issues are concerned?
Right. No, that's a good question as well. And almost it kind of ties into what we've already been talking about. So when you incorporate as a C corp, the U.S. government can tax you in one of three ways: as a sole proprietorship, which is we're not talking about that today, or as a C corp, or as a S corp. Um, Unfortunately, many founders, and I actually don't know why this is, but for whatever reason, many founders unfortunately select that they want to be taxed as an S corp, which is a critical mistake because again, it comes down to what investors demand. So when you select that you want to be taxed as a S corp as opposed to be taxed as a C corp, and again, I'm not an accountant, but I've just had conversations with many accountants, and they tell me that this is a critical problem in the startup community. When you elect to be taxed as an S corp, what it does it severely limits the number of investors that you can have and the type of investors that you can have. So when you elect to be taxed by the government as an S corp, you're saying that only U.S. Naturalized citizens or companies can invest in my company. So obviously, if you're a startup company, you're trying to raise as much money as possible. You don't know where your next investor might come from. He or she might be U.S. based, or they might be in the U.K., or they might be in Cape Town, South Africa. So because you don't know that, you don't want to limit yourself in terms of in terms of electing to be taxed as an S corp. Also, the problem with being taxed as an S corp is it limits the number of investors that are even allowed to invest in the company. So, as an S corp, you can only have 100. I believe the number is still 100 investors in your company. Again, it might seem like a lot, but I'm sure many of your audience members have heard of these different applications for raising raising WeFunder. Oftentimes when you put yourself in those and when you try to raise money that way, it could be 60 people who chip in a little money at a time, and that just makes it all the more difficult to raise. So the way to avoid the problems with S corp is to not when you're talking to your accountant, make sure your U.S. based accountant. That's important too, because every country has different taxation laws. So it's important that you pair yourself with an accountant that's based here in the United States. They will advise you to stay away from being taxed as an S corp and be taxed as a C corp, because again, it allows you to have more than 100 investors. When you're a C corp, they don't care. I mean, you still have to make disclosures, but they don't care if you're an investor from Cairo, Egypt, or California, USA. So that's why, again, it just makes too much sense to incorporate as a C corp, and then also when you're talking to your accountant, make sure that you tell your accountant that I also want to be taxed as a C corp. To your next question, which was in regards to intellectual property, that's a very important aspect, particularly when companies are first starting out. Too often, these agreements aren't in place, and registration with the relevant governmental bodies does not happen, and as a result, founders and companies suffer. So I always recommend, as soon as you incorporate, start requiring that your fellow business partners and then any employees that you may have sign. They're not non-disclosure agreements, but basically confidentiality agreements that basically say that the matters and the issues that we discuss within the company are are property of the company, and they shall not be disclosed. And then also it says that any work that you do for the company is also property of the company. Again, so no one could work for your company for a month or two, basically steal your idea, and then you have no legal document in place to say that, well, wait a minute, they were never supposed to do that. So that's why it's important, to require that everyone involved in the company sign these very, very critical confidentiality agreements. Also, when it comes to registering your trademarks with the United States Trademark and Patent Office, that's a step that often gets overlooked because one, people find it to be, very, very costly. But when you think about it, it's actually a smart investment because the money that you spend to register your trademark is much. It's 100 times cheaper than the money that it would take for you to, if you do not register, someone else is using your trademark name, then you have to sue them in a U.S. court, basically for trademark or copyright infringement. The costs that are associated with, litigation and suing people, anything related to a courtroom is going to cost like a lot of money. So it actually makes more financial business sense to just go ahead and spend the money and register your trademark with the United States Trademark and Patent Office. So no one can ever make the claim that no, actually this trademark is mine as opposed to yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I love how you literally have exposed some very critical mistakes that usually being made. The reason is because if you literally say you want to be taxed as an F corp, literally you are limiting the amount of investors that can invest in you. And if you actually do a C corp, you can have unlimited. A lot of people don't know that, so that's very important for us. And thank you very much for actually sharing that. That's super super interesting. And then you are also talking about how important it is to have agreements with your staff, with your whoever it is. Maybe you have somebody that's building a software. You need to have a non-disclosure agreement that basically protects your property. And there's something I always like to add is that especially if you are building a technology-based product, there's something I always look out for in documents when I'm doing due diligence from startups that
Mhm.
claim to be C corps and all. I try to understand who is the owner of the product, of the software that the company is running. Has it been formally bequeathed to the company?
Right.
Some people will say, some startup founders will say, I have, this is my idea, right? So I don't think I have to give it to the company. But it's so important. What happens if the founder says, I'm no longer doing this? What happens to the intellectual property that the company is running with? So you have a lot of agreements, more or less like software licensing agreement, where they bequeath that license and give it to the company. So whatever happens within the structure of the company, that intellectual property remains the same, like it's still owned by the company. And I think that's a very critical thing that you mentioned. And of course, the issue about actually working with there was something you mentioned about the fact that if you choose a particular form, you have to actually please, I don't know if you can remind me about that part. You talked about you have to use it has to be in US courts. I don't know if you recall, there was something you said about the fact that, yes, can you explain that or maybe just restate that so that, because I need to understand what that means. Yeah.
Right. No. So what I meant by that is that basically it's like what my my father, my Yoruba father always tells me. The cheap comes out expensive, right? So sometimes, and I understand it completely well. When you're a startup founder and money is tight and you're trying to deploy resources as smartly as possible, you might want to not pay for certain services or try to avoid paying for certain services. But all I meant by when I mentioned the U.S. courts is that if you if you try to avoid the cost of filing your trademark, if you try to avoid the cost of paying a an attorney to draft up, the appropriate confidentiality work for hire agreements, and making sure that each and every person involved that works for the company executes those agreements. Um, you know, that's a cost, but it's a small cost in comparison to if you do not do that. And then someone, again, who worked for the company for only 3 months, but obviously saw all of the insider critical non-public information, then goes and starts a company that's eerily similar to your company. Well, now you have to sue that person for basically theft of proprietary information and trade secrets. I mean, and you might win or you might not win, but whether you win or lose, it's going to be extremely costly because, again, courtroom litigation trials are very, very costly. And then the same thing if someone, is using a trademark that you never registered, and now you have to, hire a lawyer to send them letters and then try to sue them. All of that is very, very expensive, and it can be avoided again if you just simply register the trademark with the United States Patent Trademark and Patent Office. And again, as it relates to the confidentiality agreements, pay a lawyer to draft up, legally binding, competent agreements. Don't try to go on Google or Yahoo and download something that you saw for free, because oftentimes those agreements have huge holes in them, and then again, you just end up compounding your costs. So again, make the smart, wise investment in an attorney to draft up these agreements, because it will save you. One, it will save you so much money in the long run, but then also it'll save you so much. It will save you a headache in the long run as well, because now you always know that the the, the technology that you have spent years developing, the genius idea that you've been honing and cultivating for years, is protected, and it cannot just be stolen away in the darkness of night.
Thank you. And I think that makes it very, very clear, right? It's very critical to have that at the back of your mind, because you really never know. No startup begins with the idea that it will fail. So I would always say something to my clients. I would always say begin with the end in mind. It's so
Right.
important. right? So let's rush quickly. We've covered about 30, 40 minutes. So let's talk about key considerations when employing a startup that literally has international goals and is already established in foreign jurisdictions. What are some labor and employment laws that they should consider when employing people in foreign countries? So, for example, I already have a startup. I'm in Nigeria. I'm established, as an LLC maybe, or a particular, structure in the US. Using
Right.
US as an example. And I've done everything that's required. I have done my accounting, my taxes, my intellectual property is safe, everything's great. But the people, right? The people are so important. The people make the organization. And as a founder, what should I think about? What are some of the core things I should think about when it comes to recruiting staff, employing staff? What should I have in place really, so that I don't have a headache at any point in time where I'm running the company in multiple jurisdictions? Yeah, that's my the next question.
Right. No, no, excellent question, fair question. I get that question, as I'm sure you do, a lot. So number one, because I work with such early stage startups and companies, and resources are tight and they need to be deployed in the smartest way possible, I always advise, um, you know, if you can avoid hiring someone as a as an employee, you should try to do that. And what I mean by that is, as I'm sure is the case in Nigeria, and here in the States, just because you work for someone doesn't necessarily mean that you're an employee. So there's basically two different classes. You're an employee, or you're an independent contractor. And the difference basically is that if you're an employee, you know that is a significant relationship that you have with your employer. Employees have a lot of rights, as they should. I'm not saying anything disparagingly, but employees have a lot of rights and privileges under U.S. law. Um, and if but if you're an employee, excuse me, if you're an independent contractor, you don't have necessarily all of those rights. You don't have necessarily all of those benefits and privileges, and you're more so um, a, you have a relationship, but it's not as a binding relationship that you have with the company. And I tell people I tell my founders or my clients to avoid entering into employment agreements, and instead opt for, if you can, an independent contractor agreement, because it cuts down significantly on your payroll, and then also it makes it clear that this person can never claim that I am an employee of the company, so therefore I am entitled to this, that, and the third, and this, that, and the third means salary. This, that, and the third means health care benefits, retirement planning programs that the company issues. You know, Again, if you want that person to be an employee, then you should obviously offer those things. But um, those are very, very costly programs for companies to uphold and to maintain. And the way to avoid that is to make sure that there's a clear understanding by paperwork, by independent contractor agreement, that's duly executed by both sides, that you are not an employee of the company, you are an independent contractor, and that is that. Um, to your other question, um, I think, and this is when you have a situation when someone is actually an employee, but you don't have enough liquid money, cash, to pay them in terms of salary. So instead of that, you pay them in terms of equity, in terms of stock. Uh, that's fine and well, but it's important to have an agreement, a memorialized, written down, black and white agreement that says, okay, you can work, we will pay you in stock, but because I don't know whether or not you're going to be a good employee from day one, it's called a vesting schedule, which I'm sure many of your audience members have heard of. But it's not just enough to say this. You have to have it memorialized and written down that says that, okay, we agree. Excuse me, this employment relationship will be for 4 years with a 1 year cliff. And what that 1 year cliff means is that that first year you're working, you work for the company for 100 days. That still doesn't mean that you get any stock in the company. You work for the company for 200 days. That still doesn't mean that you get any stock in the company. Once you work for a company for 365 days, right? Because that'll be over 1 year. Then you finally are granted equity stock in the company, and it's important to have that agreement in place, because when you don't, that employee can make the claim that no, from day one, the first day that I was on the job, I was granted, 6%, 9%, 11% of stock within the company. But then, who knows, that it may have been a bad hire, and then 2 months later, you never hear from them again. And so now you have this person who's not working for the company, and yes, you're not paying them any money, but if you look at your cap table, your cap table, I'm sure your audience have heard of, is a term that shows everyone who is an owner within your company. If you look at your cap table, you have this person who only worked for the company for 2 months, but now is a 9% equity owner. So if hopefully you go on to raise millions and millions of dollars, and there's a huge exit. This person who, again, was only affiliated with the company for 2 months, who was a bad hire, who it was a mistake to hire this person. Now they become effectively a millionaire, and they did little to no work. And why? Because the company did not have the proper paperwork in place to guard against that. So again, whether you're an independent contractor or an employee, it's important to have these documents in place, legal binding documents that state in black and white what is what, and it's all to protect the company.
I could just keep listening to you over and over again. Like it was so enlightening. Thank you. There's so many guys, for everyone listening right now, you need to watch this over and over again, because what he's mentioned are things that literally I encounter and experience almost every time I review a document from a startup that's trying to raise funds. I look at those clauses, right? Ezra has mentioned something very important: knowing who is long term, knowing who is short term, and knowing who to put in what. Not every startup has the funds or the capital to have full board employees, and
Right.
that's why we have a lot of platforms like Fiverr, Upwork, that are able to provide contractual based, performance based work relationships, right? And he's mentioned something that you have to have very, very solid terms with them, solid agreements with them, to say this is what you're doing. This, and let me call out a clause. He said, this particular agreement does not connote a partnership, an employer-employee relationship, right? When you state
Right.
those things specifically on those contracts, right, it's
Right.
very clear that no, you are not an employee, you are just doing some work for us. And if you are going to have a full board employee, you must know the rules and regulations of the jurisdiction where they work
Right.
and the labor laws that govern that. So if you're an international company, and let's say you're a KPMG, for example, and you already have a an office in Nigeria, you must know the Nigerian labor laws So that means if you're a startup and you are going to be having American or international employees, you must know the laws that govern the labor laws in the US or the state where the startup is registered. So that's something that you always have to consider. Something else also he mentioned is you may not always be able to pay them funds or pay money, right? You
Right.
need to be able to say if you are giving equity, have a clawback clause. And Ezra has done
Right.
such a fantastic work in explaining what a clawback means, right? Yes, we are giving you 11 or 10 or 5%, but until you hit this milestone, it doesn't become yours, right? This is something very similar to a vesting agreement that can usually also be done with maybe you're a software developer, right? Before they get those shares, there's a vesting schedule, there's a vesting period. You don't want to just have a clawback clause, but that's what usually we do over here, having that vesting schedule that basically says these are your shares, but you must hit this milestone, before you are able to, claim ownership in court, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely, Rose. We have those too, by the
Yeah,
way. I was
right. I see
in
that
that.
American is very. Mhm.
Yeah, in that particular instance, I was just talking about a time vesting equity schedule, but you're absolutely right. There's also milestone equity vesting schedules. And if you're a salesperson, for instance, sometimes the milestone is how many how much revenue are you able to generate? If you're a software engineer, it's okay. If you build this MVP, okay, you get X% of shares. Okay, that makes sense for a software engineer. But if you're a salesperson, if you're able to bring, I don't know, 100,000 end users to the app by X date, you will be granted X amount of shares. So it doesn't matter whether it's timing based or achievement based. What's important is that there's an agreement in place to where, again, the employee cannot make the claim that, no, on day one, when I started working for your company, I am entitled to, 9% equity within the company. And again, same thing like my father always says, the cheap becomes, but when you try to be cheap, it ends up being expensive. If you do not invest in legal counsel to draft these agreements for you, and you just say it verbally, or you try to do something, you pull something off the internet and you try to do it yourself, and because you're not a trained attorney, there's a lot of holes in those agreements. You find yourself having to litigate this in court. And as a startup founder, the biggest fear you should have, of course, beyond failing, but the biggest fear you should have is to avoid court, because that is not what your startup was designed to do, to fight battles in court all day. The startup company that you developed and honed after all of these years, you want to be out there building your product, testing it, making it better for the marketplace.
Thank you. So I think the network was a bit shady. I really hope you were able to hear me. But I hope you can hear me.
Oh yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, all right, fantastic. So I'm thinking maybe it's mine. Okay, all right. So let's move. We're almost done. We've gone past 1 hour, so I think I'm going to just skip to the next question, which is you could just summarize. So there are issues as regards anti-bribery and corruption laws. There's a big deal about data right now, data protection and of course privacy. There's a huge buzz now on AML compliance, anti-money laundering and compliance, and product safety labeling and all that. So, what are some compliance considerations that you need to really have in mind? if you're going to be moving your business, or you're going to be establishing your business in such jurisdiction, based on some of these things I've mentioned: data protection, anti-bribery, corruption laws, money laundering regulations. Just touch basically on them because of our time. What are some of the key compliance considerations that you have seen from experience? Startups basically have to pay attention to when establishing their businesses in that area. Thank you.
Right. No, no, good question. Thank you, Rose. So I think the biggest thing when it comes to anti-money laundering, AML, anti-bribery and corruption, privacy compliance programs, the biggest thing is one, and again, not too many people skip over this step, but these programs need to be in place. They need to be written down somewhere and easily accessible to everyone within the company. So if that's like a Google, shared drive or whatever cloud storage technology that your company uses, these policies need to be readily accessible by everyone within the company. So that's number one. They need to exist because if investigators start, checking in and doing investigations in your company, and they find out that these policies are nowhere to be found, that's they don't need to do a second level analysis. You're already are going to suffer a stiff penalty and fine. So number one, they need to exist. But number two, it's not just enough that they exist. It, they need to actually be used, and they need to actually have teeth. So what I mean by that is you need to be able to demonstrate and show regulators that not only do we have these policies in place, but if you look at the way that the systems and the processes within our companies and how it's ran, excuse me, you'll see that this isn't just we're not just paying lip service, so to speak, to these services. We actually have our employees go through a systematic approach as it relates to this can be privacy, this can be anti money laundering, or this can be the anti bribery regulations. It, it's not just enough just to have it listed down on paper somewhere. You actually need to be able to demonstrate and show that you, the company, your employees, actually adhere to these policies. Because again, if regulators come in and say, yes, we see that you have these policies, but just looking at your records and just looking at the way that your company is ran, it's clear that no one knows the policy. And even if they do know that the policy exists, no one adheres to it because you don't require them to adhere to it. So it's when we talk about these programs, privacy, anti-bribery, anti-money laundering, I would say those. If I can leave your audience with anything, those are the two most important things. Make sure that they exist, because too often I've been to so many websites, when I click on the terms and conditions or the privacy policy at the end of the website page, it just the website goes nowhere, or it says 404, error, because they haven't obviously invested in writing those terms and conditions of those private or that privacy policy. So make sure that they exist, but then two, make sure that they're actually being implemented throughout your company, because again, I'll say it for the third time, the cheap becomes expensive when you try to avoid the cost of drafting these policies and procedures, and putting them in place and implementing them. When the government finds out that these policies are not in place and they're not being implemented, the penalties are stiff and harsh. I think I lost you. I think we lost Rose. um,
Sorry about that. I think it was my network.
I got you back now.
It's I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's the elections or something, but my network is really really bad. But I try to have a backup of a backup. But yeah. But I were you done with your last thoughts?
Yes, I was basically just talking about the importance of making sure that anti-bribery, anti-money laundering, and then also privacy programs are not only are they in place, but they are actually being administrated throughout the company. Because again, if you try to avoid the costs that are associated with making sure that those two things are achieved, when government regulators find out, um, the financial penalties are stiff and harsh, and sometimes they are a death sentence.
All right. Thank you very much. Um, and there was something you said, you go to some websites and you just look at the templates of the documents that they have on the website. And you don't even know where they got it from. Did they just download the templates? And I have come across such situations where I see that, some of these things they are not seen as so important, right? I'll give a typical example. So there was a company that literally tried to have some sort of aggregator platform.
Uh-huh.
And the truth is, yeah, the truth is they didn't understand some key compliance requirements. And I'm talking about just even here, where I'm located here in Nigeria. They didn't have
Right.
some key compliance requirements for starting the business, or for having the terms and conditions as regards how they were going to use customers' data, how they were going to implement, or how they were going to do some of these things. They didn't have that, and they ended up being penalized by the Nigerian Data Protection Bureau, right? Because they were unable to properly implement some of the things that were required by law. And just imagine if that's domestic. If you breach those things international, it can have a ripple effect on, if not every part of your business, very, very key and very major part. So I think it's something that should not be joked with. I also remember having a conversation with a platform where they needed to have an AML CFT compliance agreement. And it was good to see that a lot of these startups now are now paying attention to these areas. They are now paying attention to compliance, because investors are no longer just excited about the amount you are making. They want to know if you are actually complying with regulations that are very important. So I think it's something to pay attention to, and I'm glad you were able to touch on it. Obviously, we cannot say everything in this session, right? We're already short of time, but thank you for really paying that attention. So let's take that out to the end, right? This final session, which is share with us some case studies or real life examples of startups that were able to, or you've helped to be able to successfully have presence in foreign jurisdictions, and maybe one or two lessons that we can learn before we move to the questions for the day. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that now to be clear, this company is not my client, but I just think it's like an awesome success story. Born out of Lagos. Perhaps some of your audience members have heard of them. Spleet is a Nigerian Lagos-based company. They consider them prop tech or property tech, and basically it's a way for people to log onto their website and buy and or rent residential property in Nigeria. So I think they are a great example of navigating one international expansion and navigating all of the potential pitfalls because I know that they were able to obviously incorporate as a Delaware C corp, but then also they had the internal legal infrastructure because they liaison with a U.S. based law firm, but obviously they still had Nigerian Lagos based attorneys because obviously they're working on the ground there in Lagos. But when it came to seeking investment dollars, they made that investment of incorporating in Delaware, retaining U.S. based legal counsel, and then because those two things that were in place, it was easier for them to solicit U.S. based investors. And one in particular was called MacVC, and they specialize in investing in companies that are backed by Black or brown owned startups. I believe the figure was 1 second. Let me find the figure. Yeah, I believe the figure was 3.6. They ended up investing $3.6 million. And obviously a lot of that has to do with the great product that they were able to build at speed, but also that money would not have been able to be invested. And U.S.-based investors or international-based investors would not have parked that amount of cash in that company if not for their smart, wise, early investment in making sure that they had U.S.-based counsel and incorporating in Delaware, and then also having a U.S.-based tax and accounting professional. So I just think that they are like the poster child for how to do it basically the right way, particularly if you're coming from a West African country. And I think by looking at what they did right, you can also look at what they didn't do, which is obviously they didn't try to short circuit or shortchange themselves by just having any lawyer, try to do this process. They said, okay, yeah, it will be expensive, but because of what we're trying to do and the problem the complex problem that we're trying to solve, it requires these initial investments. And I think now you can see them in TechCrunch, Crunchbase, all these different international tech startup focused publications because they did it the right way.
Three things you mentioned is quality over quantity. Like, it's not just about being cheap, right? Quality is important, especially based on what you're trying to achieve. The second thing you've mentioned is the fact that they liaised with international lawyers, they had domestic lawyers, so they knew how important it was to have lawyers over there who knew the terrain, and they were willing to actually pay for that service, right? And I think it's an investment. I always say something to startups that consider compliance as an investment. Consider legal issues or legal to-dos as investments, not unnecessary expenses. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And you need to work with people who understand the work. Don't just say because you're trying to save cost, just go to any firm that claims that they can do it and they don't have a track record. Now, that brings me to my one and only question, and we're going to use that to end this session, right? I see some people who are still online. They can always send their questions to you later. But the major question that I got is in terms of cost. How much? Now, this is not in terms of maybe the legal fees, because that's a discussion that can always be had. But in terms of cost of incorporation, cost of registering your intellectual property, cost of maybe hiring a consultant or tax consultant or an accountant on an international scale, right? what's the cost implication like, and what are some of the ways to actually get very good deals. To because of course, in a manner of speaking, it could be expensive, but um, can you advise as to cost implications, and if there is need for extra help, can you also give us some of your details that we can take that conversation further? Thank you.
Right. No, no. So in terms of trying to keep down costs, I totally understand that, and it's extremely important. And every business owner should be thinking about keeping down costs, and that includes legal. I hope no one has the impression that I'm saying no matter what the cost, in terms of like legal or accounting, whatever the lawyer or accountant tells you to pay, pay them. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. Still price check, still shop around, still try to find the best deals as you can when it relates to legal and or accounting services. But I will say that, off as it relates to incorporating your Delaware C corp, which I believe is speaks for the majority of your audience. That can be done via online services that can do it for you virtually. Um, at a more cost-effective rate than what a lawyer would charge. And the reason is that because when you incorporate, that's not really legal work. That's more so clerical work because you're really just filing papers with the government. The actual legal work comes from, again, those critical and legal documents that every company needs, particularly starting off. So one, I would say, use a legal incorporation service. Here in the states, they call like legal Zoom and things of that nature. But then also when it comes to the critical legal documents, I would say find an attorney, find a startup law attorney, and it's important that they specify that they do startup law, but then also make sure that they offer flat fee costs. A lot of startup attorneys will offer you a bundle package, basically, where they offer all of these important legal agreements for a bundle rate, a flat fee rate. So that means no matter how many hours that it takes for them to draft these agreements and how many revisions that it takes for them to go back and forth with you, it would all be a flat rate, whereas some attorneys charge you an hourly rate. And, sometimes that's fine. It's just that, again, because a lot of startups are extremely price sensitive, they need to know what is the price certain, or some certain, I guess I should say, of a particular legal service. And if, again, when you talk about those initial foundational critical legal agreements, those can be found at a flat fee rate.
Thank you, thank you. I love what you mentioned too. So you basically told us that it's good to go for what you can afford, but in the meantime, there's a lot of options, right? Some firms, offer flat fees, which is really good. Than hourly. Some actually prefer hourly. They're able to negotiate, but I would say it all boils back down to the conversations, right? And I'm sure we all that are listening on this have you, right? I think you're doing such an excellent work in your space. So, permission to flood your DMs after now and say, you know what, we're trying to do this. Um, Please give us something. And hopefully, maybe when they mention that they watch you, maybe you would be nice to give a very interesting discount.
Right. No,
Right.
no. Thank you so much, Rose. Yeah, no, I'm certainly happy to talk with your audience members. My website is www.ezralaw. You can there you go. You can see it right there. www.ezralaw.co, not .com, but .co. And you can set up a free consult with me there, and we can talk about different issues, because obviously I know that every startup is at a different level, so I want to be appreciative and responsive to that. Also, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me at my name, Ezra Salami, or you can go to my law firm page, Ezra Law, and you can find my law firm page on LinkedIn. I'm certainly happy to connect. Let's keep having conversations, because I just think what's growing and building right now in Nigeria, Ghana, West Africa. A lot of great things are going on in Cape Town and Johannesburg too. Wonderful things are going on in the continent, and I'm so proud that I have actual direct connection to the continent. So any way that I can help, the continent grow based on my, legal skill set, I definitely want to do that.
Thank you. We're very appreciative. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you for this. So with this, I don't know if you have any questions else. I'm still waiting for a question, but if you have any other questions, please do reach out to Ezra. Ezra, I would say thank you very much for this. I know that booking a consultation with you alone is some couple of dollars, right? But you are here giving us the gift of your time. So we really thank you for being here, despite the little technology hitches here and there. But yes, thank you very much. And I'm hoping that for everyone who is opportune to watch this has learned one or two things. For me, the number one lesson that I have learned is that registering your company is not all that there is, right? To expanding internationally, there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's important to get the right counsel, have the right advice, and have the right source of information that can help you make the best decision, so that you are not just doing things by yourself and making so many mistakes along the way. Right. So thank you very much, Ezra. I don't know, do you have any final thoughts or any final comments? I do not see any comments coming in. There are no final thoughts. I want to say thank you very much. Let's just have maybe just one or two words from me. I've said my own final comments, but I'd love to have one or two words from you before we go. Thank you.
Well, I just want to personally thank you, Rose. You've been, so kind and gracious and helpful. I love that we were able to connect, and I'm hoping that we can continue to build and cultivate the wonderful Nigerian, West African, entire continent, African continent, African diaspora, startup community, and we're all just doing our part.
All right. Thank you very much. And with that, we've come to the end. I definitely know that you'll be getting tons of messages. So looking forward to seeing them come into your DM. And if you have any offers or anything you're offering, definitely they can always reach out to you on your website, and I'm sure that they will get all the help they possibly can. Thank you very much, Ezra. I am very, very happy for being here. I look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully. And yes, thank you, and have an amazing evening.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of this. And thank you for bearing with us. It's 1 hour, 34 minutes past time. And please, if you have any questions or have any of these issues needed to be sorted out, please reach out to us. And I do reply all my messages on LinkedIn and YouTube. And thank you very much for actually being here. Oh, wow. I see a comment from Bounty. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. I hope this was very useful to you. Have a very good evening, everyone. Wishing all the best to the country and the elections, hoping it all goes well. And wherever you're watching from, anywhere in the world, this is Rosemond signing out. And I say thank you very much and have a very, very, very pleasant weekend. Bye.